I never thought I'd be in this position, pouring my heart out to the internet, trying to make sense of my own life while strangers dissect it. But here I am, because I don't know what else to do. My name is Daniel, and I've been married to Laura for 7 years. We met in college. She was the type of person who lit up every room she walked into, full of energy, full of life. I was the steady one, the guy who made sure the bills were paid on time, the one who always had a plan. I loved her unpredictability, her wild stories, the way she always had something exciting to say. And for the longest time, I thought we worked because we balanced each other out. I had no reason to doubt her, no reason to think that our life together was anything but solid. But looking back now, I can see the cracks were there. I just didn't want to see them. It started with little things, subtle shifts in the way she spoke to me, the way she moved around me. Laura was always a talker. She used to tell me everything about her day, from the annoying coworker who wouldn't stop humming at his desk to the overpriced lunch she regretted buying. But one day, she just stopped sharing. I'd ask how work was, and she'd just shrug and say, "Nothing new," before changing the subject. I let it slide at first, thinking she was just tired, maybe overwhelmed with work. But then the vague responses became the norm. It wasn't just that she stopped telling me things, it was that she didn't want to. I'd catch her staring at her phone, smiling at something, and the second I looked over, the expression would disappear. When I asked what was funny, she'd just shake her head and mutter something about an inside joke I wouldn't get. I brushed it off, but a small part of me, the part that I should have listened to, felt the first pull of unease. Then there was her phone. Laura was never the type to be secretive with it. She'd leave it lying around, open to notifications, never thinking twice about me picking it up to check the weather or search for a recipe. But suddenly, she was attached to it like it was an extension of her hand. She kept it on silent, flipped it over whenever she set it down, and became oddly defensive if I so much as glanced in its direction. I made a joke about telemarketers hounding her, but she barely laughed, just nodded and mumbled something about spam calls before tucking the phone into her pocket. It was small, almost insignificant, but it didn't sit right with me. Then came the late nights. She started going out more, always with an excuse. Work events, girls' nights, catching up with old friends. At first, I didn't question it. Laura had always been social, and I never wanted to be the kind of husband who made her feel trapped. But it was the way she acted before she left, the way she stood in front of the mirror a little longer than usual, the way she picked outfits she hadn't worn in months, the way she carefully applied lipstick even though I knew she barely put in that much effort for our date nights anymore. I convinced myself I was overthinking. But then, she started coming home later and later, sometimes smelling faintly of a cologne that wasn't mine, making up lazy excuses that never quite fit together. And no matter how exhausted I felt waiting up for her, she would always brush past me with a dismissive, "I'm just tired," before heading straight to bed. It wasn't just her body that felt distant, it was her. The way she used to reach for me absent-mindedly, the way she would play with my hair while we watched TV, the way she would rest her hand on my knee when we sat together, those little things disappeared, and I had no idea why. I told myself we were just in a rut, that every couple goes through phases where things feel off. I made an effort. I tried to plan little dates, tried to bring back the excitement, tried to talk to her about us. Every time, she waved it off with excuses: too busy, too tired, too much on her plate. I even asked if something was wrong, if I had done something to upset her, but she just sighed and told me I was overthinking, that she was just stressed from work. And maybe I would have believed that. Maybe I would have kept lying to myself, if it weren't for what happened 3 weeks ago. That day, I was supposed to be at work, but a last-minute meeting got canceled, so I thought I'd surprise Laura with her favorite vanilla latte from the cafe near her office. Just a small, thoughtful thing, something to brighten her day, something to remind her that I was still here, still thinking about her. But as I walked up to the cafe, my world tilted. There, in the reflection of the large window, I saw her. Sitting inside, leaning forward, laughing. Not at her phone, not at a friend, but at him. Some guy I had never seen before, sitting across from her, mirroring her every movement. It wasn't just a casual conversation, it was the way she touched his wrist as she spoke, the way she tilted her head, the way she looked at him. That look, one I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time, hit me harder than a punch to the gut. For a second, my mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a work meeting. Maybe it was an old friend. Maybe it was innocent. But deep down, I already knew the truth. The way she was smiling, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way she leaned in close, like she wanted to be nearer to him, it was all too familiar. I had seen that version of Laura before, Back when we were first dating. Back when I was the one making her laugh like that. I should have walked inside, confronted her, slammed the coffee onto the table and demanded an explanation. But I didn't. My feet stayed rooted to the sidewalk, my body refusing to move, my hands clutching that stupid cup of coffee as if holding onto it would somehow stop my world from caving in. And that's when I realized, this wasn't just some innocent meeting. This wasn't the beginning of something I could prevent. This was the middle. The middle of a story that had already been written behind my back. A story where I was the fool who had been looking the other way for far too long. I don't remember how long I stood outside that café, gripping that damn coffee cup like it was an anchor. My mind felt like it was moving in slow motion while my pulse pounded in my ears. The logical part of me kept whispering excuses, trying to convince me that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't what it looked like. But the gut feeling, the one I had been pushing down for weeks, was screaming at me that I had just seen something I was never supposed to see. That look on her face, the way she leaned in, the way her fingers brushed against his wrist, it wasn't just friendly. It was intimate. It was something she hadn't given to me in a long time. And suddenly, everything made sense. The late nights, the guarded phone, the sudden disinterest in me. It was like the puzzle had been scattered in front of me, and I was too blind to see the pieces falling into place until now. I should have stormed inside. Should have walked right up to their table and demanded an explanation. Should have thrown that coffee in her lap and made a scene. But I didn't. Instead, I turned around and walked away, my body moving on autopilot while my brain reeled. I barely remember driving home, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The entire ride, my mind was flooded with memories, our wedding day, our vacations, the lazy Sunday mornings where we'd stay in bed until noon talking about everything and nothing. It all felt like a cruel joke now, like I had been living in a beautifully crafted illusion that shattered the second I saw her with him. I felt like a fool. Like an idiot who had spent the last 7 years believing in something that had already started to rot from the inside. By the time I got home, the coffee had gone cold in my hand, and I didn't even realize I was still holding it until I set it down on the counter, staring at it like it was some kind of symbol of my own stupidity. My heart was still racing, my stomach twisted into knots so tight I thought I was going to be sick. I paced the living room, every scenario running through my head, confronting her, pretending I hadn't seen anything, waiting for her to come home so I could act normal and see if she'd lie straight to my face. I checked my phone, my fingers hovering over her name, but I didn't call. I wanted to hear her voice, wanted to see if she'd tell me she was still at work, wanted to catch her in a lie, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I did something I never thought I would do. I started digging. I had never been the kind of husband who checked up on his wife. I never felt the need to. Laura had always been independent, and I had always trusted her. But trust is a funny thing. It takes years to build and seconds to destroy. And now that mine was in pieces, I needed to know the truth, even if it killed me. I went straight to our shared laptop, the one we barely used anymore since we both had work computers and our phones for everything. My hands were shaking as I opened up her browser history, my chest tightening with every scroll. At first, it was normal shopping sites, news articles, random searches. But then, buried in the middle of it all, I saw it. A search for a hotel. Not just any hotel, a boutique one downtown, the kind of place we used to book for anniversaries. The timestamp showed she had searched for it 2 weeks ago. My stomach dropped. I clicked further, going through past searches, through anything I could find. Restaurant reservations I had never heard about. A gym membership she had never mentioned signing up for. But the worst part? A string of Uber receipts. Trips taken during the middle of the day, always from her office to random locations, never back. My head spun as I clicked through them, each one confirming what my gut already knew. This wasn't new. It wasn't a one-time thing. It had been happening right under my nose, and I had been too blind or too trusting to see it. I shut the laptop so hard the screen nearly cracked and sat there, staring at the floor, my entire body numb. The logical part of me knew I had enough proof, but it wasn't enough. I needed to hear it from her. I needed to look her in the eye and hear whatever bullshit excuse she'd come up with. I needed to see if she would lie to my face the same way she had been lying every time she walked through the door late at night with that half-assed excuse about work running late. I checked the time. It was almost 6. She'd be home soon. I sat on the couch, waiting. Every second felt like an eternity, my mind running in circles, my emotions cycling between rage, devastation, and a hollow kind of numbness I didn't know I was capable of feeling. And then I heard the door unlock. My body tensed as I watched her walk in, smiling like she didn't have a single care in the world, tossing her keys onto the counter like she always did. "Hey, babe," she said, kicking off her heels, completely unaware that her entire world was about to change. I forced myself to speak, my voice disturbingly calm. "Where were you?" She barely glanced at me, already moving toward the kitchen. "Work ran late. You know how it is." My blood went ice cold. She didn't even hesitate, didn't even blink. The lie slipped out of her mouth so effortlessly it made me sick. I stood up slowly, my hands clenched at my sides. "Funny," I said, my voice quieter now, sharper. "Because I saw you at the café." Her back stiffened just slightly, so slight I almost missed it, but then she turned around, her face perfectly composed, eyebrows raised in mock confusion. "What?" she asked, feigning innocence so well I almost second-guessed myself. "Almost." "I saw you," I repeated, my voice harsher now. "I saw you sitting with him." There was a flicker in her expression, so fast it was almost undetectable, but it was there. A brief flash of panic before she recovered, rolling her eyes like I was being ridiculous. "Oh my God, Daniel, are you serious? That was just a coworker. We were going over a project." She was lying. I knew it. But what got me was how easily she did it. How naturally the excuse rolled off her tongue like she had rehearsed it, like she had a whole collection of these lies ready to pull out whenever necessary. My chest burned as I stared at her, my mind replaying the way she had touched his arm, the way she had leaned in, the way she had smiled at him in a way she hadn't smiled at me in months. And now she was standing here, in our home, looking me dead in the eye and acting like I was crazy for even questioning it. I let out a slow breath, trying to keep my voice steady, trying not to completely lose it. "And the hotel?" I asked. "That did it." The color drained from her face for just a second before she forced a scoff, crossing her arms. "What are you even talking about?" she snapped, going on the defensive now, as if she could gaslight me into thinking I was imagining things. I pulled out my phone, holding up the screenshots of her searches, the Uber receipts, the reservations. "This," I said coldly. "Explain this." She stared at the screen, her lips parting slightly like she was searching for the right words. And in that moment, I knew. There was no explanation she could give me that would make this go away. The truth was already out, hanging in the air between us, suffocating the last remnants of whatever we used to be. She had been caught. And now, there was nowhere left to hide. The moment she saw the screenshots, the silence that followed felt like it lasted an eternity. Her entire posture changed in that instant, her expression flickering with a mix of panic and anger, but she quickly buried it under a mask of calmness, trying to act as if she was still in control of the situation. I could see her searching for something to say, some excuse that might absolve her, some justification that could patch up the mess she had created. But the truth was too glaring to hide behind anymore. The lies had piled up, and now they were out in the open. She stood there for what felt like an age, eyes flicking back and forth between the phone in my hand and my face, unable to come up with a single thing that could explain away her actions. She opened her mouth a few times, but nothing came out, just weak attempts at deflecting the reality that was so plainly staring at us both. When she finally spoke, her voice was sharp, defensive, as if she were the one being attacked. She tried to shift the blame onto me, accusing me of invading her privacy, of spying on her, turning this whole thing around like I was the one who had done something wrong. It was as if the years we had spent together, the bond we once shared, meant nothing anymore. Instead of coming clean, she opted for the easy route, blame me, make me the villain in this story, and maybe, just maybe, I'd take the bait and feel guilty for catching her. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I had seen it in her eyes the moment she started speaking, a mixture of guilt and resentment that made my skin crawl. She wasn't sorry, she was annoyed that I had found out. Every word she said made my blood boil. The excuses, the dismissive attitude, the complete lack of empathy for what she had done, it all chipped away at whatever fragile trust one had left in her. She tried to explain herself, but every explanation only dug the hole deeper. She said it wasn't serious, that it just happened, as if her betrayal was some kind of accident, like she had stumbled into someone else's arms by mistake. She tried to downplay it, like I was supposed to just accept the fact that she had been sneaking around, lying to my face, and making excuses for her absences. The worst part? She expected me to buy it. She expected me to nod along, to just accept the fact that she had crossed every line and then some, without facing the consequences. I could feel the anger building inside of me with every word she spoke. It wasn't just the affair itself that hurt, it was the way she handled it, the way she refused to take responsibility, The way she thought she could just keep spinning her web of lies without ever truly coming clean. I tried to stay calm, tried to hold onto some semblance of control, but it was becoming increasingly difficult as she stood there, acting like she was somehow the victim in this situation. Her tone shifted from defensive to almost condescending, as though she were talking to a child who didn't understand. She dismissed my concerns, minimized everything that had happened, like it was no big deal. But I knew it was. I knew that the betrayal she had orchestrated was far more than just an affair. It was the destruction of everything I thought was real. The years we had spent together, the trust one had placed in her, the love I had given so freely, she had taken it all and thrown it away without a second thought. And now, standing there, she was pretending like it was nothing. Like she hadn't just destroyed the foundation of our marriage. The final blow came when she admitted the affair had been going on for months. She said it so casually, like it was just another thing on her to-do list, as though I was supposed to accept it without question. My stomach dropped as I processed her words. I had suspected something was off, but to hear it confirmed, to know that she had been carrying on behind my back for so long, it felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I tried to keep it together, tried to stay composed, but the weight of her admission crushed me. This wasn't some one-time mistake. This was a pattern of behavior, something she had been actively hiding from me while continuing to live in our home, pretending like nothing was wrong. And when she finally admitted it, when the truth spilled out, there was no remorse in her voice, only frustration, like I had ruined her carefully constructed facade. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't even really apologizing. She was just annoyed that I had caught her. I could feel the anger surging inside of me, and I had to take a moment to collect myself. I had spent years believing in her, in us, and now everything I thought was true had been shattered in an instant. It wasn't just the affair that stung. It was the realization that I had been blind to it for so long. She had been living a double life, and I had been so wrapped up in my own sense of security that I hadn't seen the signs. I had ignored the late nights, the strange behaviors, the guardedness, because I wanted to believe that things were still okay. But now it was clear that I had been fooling myself. She wasn't the woman I thought she was. The person I had shared my life with, the woman I trusted, didn't exist anymore. And the worst part? I didn't even know when that change had happened. Had it been a slow unraveling, or had she already checked out before I even noticed? It was in that moment, standing there in our kitchen, that I realized I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't keep pretending, couldn't keep living a lie. I wasn't going to let her continue to manipulate me, to keep me in the dark while she lived whatever life she wanted. I didn't care if she thought I was being unreasonable. I didn't care if she tried to tell me I was overreacting. I had had enough. I wasn't going to sit here and let her tear apart everything we had built without facing the consequences of her actions. I wasn't going to keep making excuses for her behavior or lying to myself about what was really happening. The person standing in front of me wasn't the woman I had married. She was someone else, someone I didn't even recognize anymore. And for the first time in years, I realized that I didn't need her in my life. I didn't need her lies. I didn't need her betrayal. I didn't need her at all. And I wasn't going to let her stay any longer, pretending like nothing had changed. The time for pretending was over. As I stood there, watching her expression shift from annoyance to something that almost looked like regret, I realized that I had reached a point of no return. The quiet of the room pressed in on me, a stark contrast to the chaos swirling inside my head. I had spent so much of my life with Laura, believing that we were a team, that we were partners in every sense of the word, and now, in a matter of moments, everything was unraveling. The house that had once been a sanctuary, filled with laughter and quiet conversations, felt cold and foreign. It wasn't just her betrayal that stung. It was the realization that I had been living in a world of illusions. Every moment, every memory, every promise we had shared now felt tainted, as if they had been built on a foundation of lies. I could still hear her voice in my head, trying to justify what had happened, trying to minimize the gravity of her actions. But it didn't matter anymore. I had stopped listening. The truth was too glaring to ignore, and nothing she said could take away the hurt, the anger, the sense of utter betrayal that had settled deep within me. She had broken something inside me, something that couldn't be fixed with a few half-hearted apologies or empty excuses. It wasn't just about the affair, it was about everything that led up to it. The lies, the secrecy, the complete disregard for the trust we had built over the years. She had thrown all of that away, and now I was left picking up the pieces of a life I no longer recognized. For so long, I had believed in the version of her that I had married, the woman who once told me that she loved me more than anything, the woman who promised that we would always be there for each other, no matter what. But that woman didn't exist anymore. She had been replaced by someone who was willing to lie, to deceive, to betray everything we had for the thrill of something new. I couldn't even wrap my mind around how quickly everything had changed. It felt like just yesterday we were planning our next vacation, talking about the future, making plans for the life we were supposed to have. And now, here I was, staring at the person who had completely shattered that vision, and I didn't know who she was anymore. The anger that had been building in me all day was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it had begun to shift. The initial rush of fury had started to fade, replaced by a hollow sadness that felt even worse. I had never been the type to cry or wallow in self-pity, but there was something about the weight of what had happened that felt unbearable. It wasn't just the cheating, it was the feeling of being utterly alone, even in the same room with her. She was right there, still trying to justify her actions, still making excuses for herself, but I couldn't feel her anymore. The connection we once had was gone, and no amount of words could bring it back. The love I had for her had been replaced by something darker, an emptiness, a loss of faith in the person I had trusted most in the world. The hardest part was realizing that she wasn't going to change. She wasn't going to suddenly come to her senses and beg for forgiveness. She wasn't going to feel the same heartbreak that I was feeling. Her apology was empty, her regret fleeting, as if the weight of what she had done hadn't fully hit her yet. I had spent so much of my energy trying to hold on, trying to salvage something that had already been lost. I had tried to believe that if I just loved her enough, if I just worked harder at being a better husband, I could fix whatever was wrong between us. But I had been wrong. There was nothing left to fix. I had given her every part of myself, and she had thrown it all away without a second thought. I started thinking about the future, about what was next for me, what I was supposed to do now that everything I had known was shattered. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into the unknown, unsure of how to take the next step. The life I had imagined for myself was gone, and I had to find a way to move forward. But the thought of staying in this marriage, of pretending that things could go back to normal, made my stomach turn. I had been betrayed in a way that left me questioning everything. And I realized, in that moment, that I couldn't continue living a lie. I couldn't stay in a relationship that was built on broken trust and shattered promises. The thought of leaving her felt strange, foreign. After all these years, I had never once imagined that this would be the end. But now, as I stood there, my mind was made up. I couldn't stay. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. She had made her choice, and I had to make mine. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be tears, there would be anger, there would be so many questions left unanswered. But I knew, deep down, that I couldn't continue down this path. There was no going back. I walked away from her that night. I didn't say another word, didn't look back. I packed a bag and left the house, needing space, needing time to breathe, to think, to process everything that had happened. The house, our home, felt suffocating now, like it was filled with nothing but ghosts of what used to be. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know how I was supposed to pick up the pieces of my life and move forward, but I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't stay in the wreckage of a marriage that no longer existed. As I sat in my car, staring out the window at the city lights, a strange sense of peace began to settle over me. The heartbreak was still there, deep and raw, but it was tempered by the realization that I had made the right choice. I didn't deserve to be treated like this. I didn't deserve to live in a marriage where my trust was betrayed and my heart was broken. And even though the future was uncertain, even though I didn't have all the answers, I knew that I had to start living for myself again. It was time to move on, to let go, and to begin the long, painful process of healing. As much as it hurt, I knew it was the only way forward. There was no other choice. The first few days after I left were a blur of numbness. I spent my time bouncing between my parents' place and a cheap apartment I had rented downtown. I didn't know what I was doing, where I was going, or how to make sense of it all. Every moment felt like it was dragging me under, like I was sinking into some kind of fog I couldn't escape. I didn't reach out to anyone at first. I didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to hear their sympathetic words or the awkward silence that always followed when people didn't know how to comfort you in a situation like this. The silence felt safer. It felt like the only thing I could control in a world that had suddenly spun completely out of control. At first, I told myself it would be okay. I kept repeating that to myself, trying to convince myself that this was the best decision. But deep down, I was terrified. I had never been alone. I had spent my whole adult life with Laura. She was my constant, my partner, my rock. And now she was gone. But the deeper I let myself think about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't about losing her. It wasn't about her. It was about reclaiming my own life, about taking back the pieces of myself that I had sacrificed for a relationship that was broken long before I realized it. The hardest part wasn't leaving her. It was letting go of the dream, the future I had imagined with her. We had talked about our plans so many times, made so many promises, but it was all a facade. The truth was, none of those promises meant anything if they were built on lies. Days turned into weeks, and the sting of the betrayal started to dull, though the pain still lingered like an old wound that hadn't quite healed. I found myself slowly reassembling the pieces of my life, picking up where I had left off, but it was hard to shake the feeling of being unmoored. The things I had taken for granted, my routines, my sense of self, felt foreign now, like I had to relearn who I was without her in my life. I started going to the gym again, something I had let slip over the past few years. I reconnected with old friends who had drifted away, people I had neglected in favor of spending all my time with Laura. It was a slow process. Every time I saw something that reminded me of her, like a song we used to listen to or a place we used to go, it would hit me all over again. But with each passing day, I found myself becoming more comfortable in my own skin, more certain that this was the right path. I won't lie, there were moments when the grief would come crashing down on me, moments when I would think about all the time I had wasted, all the years spent believing in something that was never real. I would replay the memories of our good times, the moments when I thought we were happy, and wonder how I had missed all the signs. But as time went on, I started to see the bigger picture. It wasn't about the past anymore. It wasn't about how things had gone wrong or who was to blame. It was about my future, about taking control of the life that was still waiting for me. I couldn't keep living in the shadow of what had happened. I had to move on, not just for my own sanity, but for my own growth. I had to become the person I was before her, before we had built our lives together. Eventually, I reached out to a therapist, someone I had been hesitant to talk to for a long time. I had always thought I could handle things on my own, that I didn't need anyone else to tell me how to feel or what to do. But the truth was, I needed help. I needed someone to help me navigate through the maze of emotions that had been thrown at me, someone who could offer guidance without judgment. Therapy became a vital part of my healing process. I learned things about myself that I hadn't understood before, how I had lost myself in trying to be the perfect partner, how I had let my identity become so intertwined with Laura's that I didn't know who I was without her. It was uncomfortable at first, confronting the parts of myself I had ignored for years, but it was also freeing. Slowly, I began to rebuild my confidence, to remember the person I used to be before everything got complicated. The hardest part, though, was learning to trust again. I realized that the betrayal wasn't just about Laura, it was about my own sense of trust in people. I had put so much faith in her, in the relationship, and had been blindsided when everything fell apart. I found myself questioning every new connection I made, every conversation, every glance. I was hyper-aware of red flags, of signs that something was wrong, even when there wasn't anything wrong. It was a defense mechanism, a way to protect myself from being hurt again. But as time passed, I learned to lower my guard, to open myself up to new possibilities without letting the past define my future. I didn't need to carry the weight of Laura's betrayal with me forever. I didn't need to let it dictate my life. As the months went on, I began to see the light at the end of the tunnel. The pain of the betrayal was still there, but it was no longer suffocating. I had found a new rhythm, a new purpose. I took up hobbies I had long abandoned, went on trips I had put off, and began rebuilding the relationships I had neglected. I started dating again, tentatively at first, unsure of what to expect, unsure if I was ready. But slowly, I began to realize that I wasn't looking for someone to replace Laura. I wasn't trying to fix what had been broken. I was looking for someone who could complement me, someone who could build something real without the shadows of past mistakes looming over us. Looking back now, I realize how much I had to learn from the whole experience. I had to learn how to be okay on my own, how to be comfortable with who I was without relying on anyone else to define me. I had to learn to forgive myself for not seeing the signs, for not acting sooner. I had to learn that healing doesn't happen overnight, and that it's okay to feel broken for a while, as long as you're willing to pick up the pieces and put yourself back together. The most important thing I've learned, though, is that life goes on. There are new experiences to be had, new people to meet, new joys to discover. And even though I'll always carry the scars of the past, I've learned that I don't have to let them define me. I've come to understand that the hardest things in life often lead to the greatest growth. What happened to me wasn't something I ever could have prepared for, but it also wasn't the end of my story. It was a painful chapter, yes, but it was just that, a chapter. And now, I'm moving on to the next one where I'm finally free to write my own story. And for the first time in a long time, I'm excited to see what comes next. The days have slowly started to blend together, but the fog that had once surrounded me is lifted, bit by bit, until I can finally breathe again. When I first walked away from Laura, I had no idea what the future would hold, and truthfully, I was terrified. I had spent so much time focused on the past, on everything I had lost, that I didn't know how to begin looking ahead. But now, months later, I can see the journey for what it truly was, a painful, difficult process of rediscovering myself and reclaiming my life. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I thought I might never be able to put myself back together. There were nights when I would lie awake, my mind racing with questions about Laura, about what went wrong, about what the future would hold. But somewhere along the way, I realized that the answers I was looking for didn't matter anymore. I had to stop searching for closure in places that would never give it to me. I had to stop trying to make sense of something that was beyond my control. The most difficult part of all of this was accepting that I couldn't change the past. I couldn't undo the betrayal, couldn't erase the hurt, and I couldn't go back to a time when everything felt easy and right. At first, that realization made me feel powerless, like I was drowning in regret. But as time passed, I came to understand that accepting what had happened was the only way forward. The more I resisted, the more I held on to the past, the more it held me captive. I had to let go, and that meant accepting the fact that Laura wasn't the person I thought she was, and that the life we had shared was no longer mine to hold on to. It didn't mean forgiving her, not yet at least, but it meant freeing myself from the weight of the past. It was only when I truly let go that I started to feel the chains loosen around me, and I began to see that my future was still mine to shape. It wasn't just about healing from the affair, it was about learning to trust again. For a long time, I thought I was too damaged, too broken, to ever open myself up to anyone else. I questioned everything, every new person I met, every potential connection I made. I kept thinking about what had happened with Laura, about how I had been so wrong about her, and I wondered if I could ever really trust someone with my heart again. But over time, I started to realize that trust wasn't something that could be given freely. It was something that had to be earned, just as it was something I had to earn in myself. Slowly, I began to let my guard down, not just with others, but with myself. I stopped seeing myself as a victim of the past and began to see myself as someone who had survived, someone who had learned from the pain and was stronger for it. It was a long and difficult process, but eventually, I started to trust again, not blindly, not without caution, but in a way that felt like the first step towards something new. As the weeks turned into months, I began to embrace the freedom that came with being alone, with standing on my own 2 feet. At first, I had feared the loneliness that would come after the end of my marriage. I had always identified myself as part of a couple, and the thought of being on my own was overwhelming. But I realized that there was a quiet strength in solitude. I didn't need anyone else to validate my worth, to define who I was. I began to rediscover my own passions, the things I had put aside in favor of being the perfect partner. I started reading again, something I had neglected for years. I took up hiking, something Laura had never been interested in, but I found it brought me a sense of peace and clarity. Slowly but surely, I rebuilt the parts of me that had been neglected. I learned to enjoy my own company, to savor the quiet moments, and to appreciate the person I was without the weight of a failed relationship on my shoulders. I won't say I've completely healed, because I don't think that's ever possible after something like this. The scars remain, but they're not as sharp as they once were. They don't control me anymore. Instead of being something that holds me back, the pain has become part of my story, a story that has made me who I am today. And now, I look at those scars and see them as reminders of my resilience, of my ability to move forward even when everything seemed impossible. I've learned to embrace the parts of myself that were once broken, to accept the mistakes and missteps as part of my journey. I am not perfect, and neither is my story, but I am mine. I am enough. There are still moments when I think about Laura, when I wonder how she's doing, if she regrets what happened, if she ever truly understood the depth of the hurt she caused. But those thoughts don't control me anymore. I no longer need answers to those questions. I've come to understand that my healing isn't about her, it's about me. It's about finding peace within myself, learning to forgive not only her but myself, for allowing things to go on as long as they did. I won't ever forget what happened, but I don't need to carry that weight with me any longer. I've let go of the past, and now, for the first time in a long time, I'm excited for the future. As I move forward, I know that life will bring its own challenges, its own heartaches, and I will face them just as I face this one, with strength, with resilience, and with the knowledge that I am capable of surviving whatever comes my way. I've learned that healing is not linear, and it's not always easy, but it's possible. And even though I can never undo what happened, I can choose how to respond to it. I can choose to let it shape me into someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who knows their worth. And that, in itself, is the greatest victory of all.